Well, good day, folks, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Solve, a program where we look at the book The Secret by Byron Price and try to figure out what the authors, artists, and creators were up to back in 1982. Today, I'm going to talk about the Tinkerbells, otherwise known as the Numerous Perversus. The Numerous Perversus. We're talking about 178 and 179 in the book The Secret. Well, I think the Tinkerbells is mainly about Alexander Graham Bell, the telephone, and things that have to do with the telephone. And so let's just get right into the fling of things by talking about Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell is going to take a little bit of time to talk about because he was born Alexander Bell. He was a Scottish-born inventor, scientist, and engineer who is credited with patenting the first practical telephone. He founded the American Telephone and Telegraph Company in 1885. His father and brother were both involved in working with elocution and speech. And we just previously talked about in the previous chapter the Jack O' Lectern, which would have a little bit to do with public speaking. And so I like how the authors kind of transition from one topic to another. Interestingly enough, Bell was born in Edinburgh, Scotland. The family home was in South Charlotte Street and has a stone inscription marking it as Bell's birthplace. The thing about it is that both of Bell's parents, I believe, were deaf. So his mother was Eliza Grace Bell. Simmons, again, was her maiden name. And so the his father's middle name was Melville. And so Alexander Melville Bell is his father. So at age 10, he convinced his father that he needed a middle name because his brothers had a middle name. And so his middle Graham actually got assigned to him because a Canadian by the name of Alexander Graham was being treated in his or was in the house as a friend of his father. And so so he ended up getting that as a name. So Bell built a homemade device that combined rotating paddles with sets of nail brushes, creating a simple dehusking machine that was put into the operation at the local mill and used steadily for a number of years. And so here we've got his first invention being a corn husking type of machine. Uh, they were basically both him and his brother invented a number of different things growing up. As an elocutionist, his father often worked with deaf people, and so this became also something that Alexander and his brother also uh, would do. Bell became so proficient that he became a father's public demonstrations, and he astonished audiences with his ability. He could decipher visible speech representing virtually every language, including Latin, Scottish, and Sanskrit. Okay, so he went to the Royal High School, not Royal. Anyway, and the University College in London. And he first started experimenting with sound in 1863 with a number of other people. His father got interested in the project, and they were able to carefully bellow forced air through a windpipe, uh, and a very recognizable mama ensued to the lovers who came to see him see the Bell's inventions. So, he has been trying to create voice for a number of different ways. Bell wrote a report on his work to a few colleagues, and they got interested in what he was doing. The Bells suffered a family tragedy, as does most all of the people in the secret. involving tuberculosis. He started working with deaf mute girls in 1865. Uh, and so his brother Melville died of complications due to tuberculosis. So Bell lands in Canada, in Paris, Ontario. The family purchased a farm of 10 acres near uh, Brantford, Ontario, excuse me. And it's here where he met and befriended some Native Americans. Uh, he continued to work with sound. So Bell's father was invited by Sarah Fuller, principal of the Boston School of the Deaf Mutes, later to become the Horace Mann School for the Deaf. And this brought him to Boston in 1871. So this is where you get some connection to this. Uh, so his father helped him set up his private practice by contacting Gardner Green Hubbard, the president of the Clark School for the Deaf, for a recommendation to teach his father's system. He also worked with Helen Keller and some other people during this period of time. So in 1872, he continued to work on vocal physiology and elocution at Boston University. Alexander Graham Bell, Boston. Ooh, Boston connections. I like it when we find more of those. Deciding to give up his lucrative Boston practice, Bell retained only two students, a 6-year-old Georgie Sanders, deaf from birth, and a 15-year-old Maybelle Hubbard. Each pupil would play an important role in the next developments. George's father, Thomas Sanders, a wealthy businessman, offered Bell a place to stay in Salem with Georgie's mother, complete with a room to experiment with things. He went on to marry Hubbard. In 1874, Bell's initial work on a harmonic telegraph began, and this is when the Western Union and a few other people picked up his idea. There was a race to the patent office. Eliza Gray was also experimenting with acoustic telegraphy. Okay, I'm spending way too much time on Bell, but basically, the Bell Telephone Company was created in 1877, and by 1886, it had more than 150 people in the United States owning telephones. Um, and there have been many developments since that time. Okay, so later he went on to do some inventing and alternative fuels. He, he investigated how to separate salt from seawater. Uh, he worked with selenium and hydro airplanes, uh, aerial vehicles, etc. Uh, the photophone, uh, all you people that like to do a Snapchat probably wouldn't be able to do that without the photophone, which was able to actually work when the amount of data that could be sent over a line worked. So the HD4 was his hydrofoil. In aeronautics, Bell was part of a group that created the AE Silver Dart in 1909. And he also got interested in heredity and genetics. Okay, so that's too much about Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Melville Bell is his brother, is a teacher and researcher in phonetics. Again, uh, same visible speech. And you got to remember, old Byron Price was into this visual publications, And so I think this is why Alexander Graham Bell, Melville Bell, and their father is probably a, I don't know, a person of interest to him, and that's kind of why I bring up the fact that I think the Bells. Um, so the only daughter of a British naval surgeon is the wife of of Alexander Melville Bell. So I wanted to take a minute. Alexander. Okay, let's see. Okay, I did talk about Alexander Melville Bell. That's his father. Okay, so we talked about uh, the Bells. So now I'm going to transition over to telephony switching because, and it looks like the image, the fairy in this thing might be switching from male to female because we have a mustache face with a pair of boobs wearing slippers. So let's talk a little bit about switching. So, by and large, the Bell telephone system would not even exist today had it not been for Almond Brown Strouger. And you're going, who the hell is Almond Brown Stouger? Stowger. He's an American inventor who gave his name to the Stouger switch, an electromagnetical telephone exchange technology uh, that he invented. So Stouger was born in Penfield, New York, near Rochester, the grandson of his second settler and his first miller in Penfield. Little is okay. So we're talking about early settlers and milling. Okay, that will later come into play when we meet uh, the Mormon later. Okay, so he taught school in Penfield and he served in the 8th New York Volunteer Cavalry during the American Civil War. It is believed. And that he might have fought at the Second Battle of Bull Run, but they don't really know. Uh, so the history of this guy is a little bit, let's say, not complete. So after the Civil War, it appears he first became a country school teacher before he became an undertaker. Okay, so we have Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone, and now and he has his connection to Boston and the deaf schools there. And now we find out that this company, the person that invented the switch, the telephone switch, was an undertaker. He was variously attributed with living in Kansas, Topeka, and Kansas City, Missouri. It is not clear where his idea for an automatic telephone exchange was originally conceived, but his patent application identifies as being a resident of Kansas City, Missouri on March 10th of 1891. So, his undertaking business was losing clients to a competitor whose telephone operator wife was redirecting everyone who called to for Stouger. So, in other words, there was a competitor in the undertaking business in the town in which he was working, and the telephone operator, who you used to use what was called a cord. In other words, you would pull out a physical connection in a series of physical connections, and you would pull that line out of the board and push it into another. If you want to see how it worked at this time, I just encourage you to look for Minnie Pearl's skit on Hee Haw or any other of the old cordboard, or just look up cordboard. So basically, his undertaking business was being directed to his competitor because the person operating the switchboard never sent the calls to him. Oh boy, the Tinkerbells, boy, they were tinkering back then, weren't they? Okay, so not to get too far off base, the Stouger Automatic Time Exchange Company was formed and installed and opened the first commercial exchange in his then hometown of LaPorte, Indiana. So in LaPorte, Indiana, the telephone exchange was designed and put together by uh, Mr. Stouger. And he had 75 subscribers and he could do 99. He married a Susan uh, from Massachusetts in 1897. He sold his patents and associates for some money. His patents were sold to the Bell system for 2.5 million in 1916. So he sold the patents to the telephone switching equipment to the automatic electric company for about $330,000 in 2021 funds. And his patents were subsequently sold to the Bell system for $63 million. You wonder who was making money in telephony back then? Apparently, the automatic electric company cashed in big time. Well, he died of an aneurysm. He was suffering from anemia in St. Petersburg, Florida. He was buried in the Greenwood Cemetery the next day. How many of these people? Anyway, he was survived by Susan, and she died in Tampa, Florida. Uh, and anyway, so it's important to note in the history of telephony when you're talking about the switch, in other words, how the phone calls actually got routed. It's not really Alexander Graham Bell's invention that led to the entire telephone network out there. It's this guy by the name of Almond Brown Stouger that is largely responsible for the telecommunications switching idea. Well, Stouger is also responsible for the rotary phone. And if you look at the image of the figure on page 179, he's wearing a rotary dial. Well, we're wearing the rotary dial basically to bring you back to Stouger again and LaPorte, Indiana, and his invention of the rotary phone, in addition to the invention of the switch. So the first patent for the rotary dial was granted to Almond Brown Stouger in 1892, but the commonly known form with the holes in the finger wheel was not introduced until 1904. And as we know, by this time, the Bell telephone system had gained the rights to his patents. So the Bell telephone system would probably exist today in its entirety as a monopoly if it wasn't for several people, and one of them being Carter, the Carter phone. And I mentioned the Carter phone decision because in the Jacko lectern, I pointed out that the 1976 debate in Philadelphia at the Walnut Street Theater was delayed for 27 minutes. And so here we have Carter, and now we've got Carter phone. And so basically, the idea was that the Bell telephone system would not allow anything to be connected to it. And so even a simple rubber cupping device that amplified the sound by putting a cup against your ear could not be attached to the Bell system's owned telephone. And everybody out here is younger than, 40 years old are saying, what? You mean you couldn't buy your own phone and buy Ma Bell, the telephone company, owned your phone, and you could not attach anything to it. So the first case was the Husha phone, and this was just a rubber cupping device. But the Bell telephone system got broke up when a guy by the name of Carter, Thomas Carter, in Texas, wanted to connect a two-way radio system to the telephone so that he could then, let's say, have somebody that was on his property 100 feet away talk on the telephone without coming to his office. Well, the Bell system said, well, no, you can't put a cradle on the telephone. No, you can't do that. Well, finally, the court ruled that you could do that. So the Carter Telephone Company is a Dallas, well, I'm just going to say Texas-based company. I think this were fairly close to Dallas. But the Carter phone decision broke up basically the Bell telephone system. and allowed you to the telecommunications network. Uh, so Hushaphone, I just briefly mentioned them. I'm not sure where they were located at. Um, Carter Phone Communications Corporation. In 1970, his company was named uh, Carter Electronics Company. Okay, so that article there doesn't provide any additional information to the story. The push button telephone. So, Western Electric experimented as early as 1941 methods of using mechanically activated reeds to produce two tones for each of the 10 digits. By the late 1940s, such technology was field tested in a number 5 crossbar switching system in Pennsylvania. So, if you're wanting to talk about touch tone, which emerged. So, the rotary dial and the almond brown Stouger switching system was completely analog. And as the need for additional capacity on the network grew, um, the Bell system was working on ways in which to increase the capacity of the network. And on April 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy started the countdown for the opening of the 1964 World's Fair by keying 1964, not 982, on the touch-tone telephone in the Oval Office, starting a contraction which will count off the seconds until the opening. On November 1963, the first electronic push-button system with touch-tone dialing was commercially offered by the Bell Telephone to customers in the Pittsburgh area towns of Carnegie and Greensburg. You remember how many times we circle back to Greensburg and Greensboro? I'm starting to wonder if you think there's one in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Maybe Greensburg is the area to look. The phone, okay, so we're now talking about DTMF systems. The phone, the Western Electric 1500 had 10 buttons. Okay, so anyway, touch tone telephony. The pulse dialing based upon the Stouger switch system. Next got the upgrade to the PBX system, the private branch exchange. And the PBX systems were developed in 71 to 73 at Bell Laboratories. And I think we'll talk about where Bell Labs here is so that you know. I think that's in Menlo Park, maybe, New Jersey or something like that. But so many of these inventions, since it was a monopoly, came out of the Bell telephone system, or Bell Telephone, Bell Labs. So Bell Labs is located in the 1960s. The laboratory was moved to New Jersey, but it first started out with Alexander Graham Bell. Chichester Alexander Bell was an American chemist and inventor. He was the first cousin of Alexander Bell, and he developed many improvements in phonographs. I don't know if we need to look at him or not. So at 1537 35th Street Northwest is where there is a National Historic Landmark building. 1537 35th Street Northwest is a landmark building of the early Bell Laboratories. In 1896, Western Electric bought property at 463 West Street and installed telephone switching equipment. The original home of Bell Laboratories was 463 West Street. Well, actually, that's not the original, but that was the second home. By the time the Bell was, by the time that this was published, uh, the Bell Labs was at the Homedale complex in New Jersey. But the largest grouping of people in the company was in Illinois, in the Naperville, Lisle, Chicago area, which had the largest concentration of employees, about 11,000. So Bell Labs expanded its reach across to a number of different other cities as well. Okay, so that's a little bit on Bell Labs. Um, so Gardner Green Hubbard. You can't leave Bell without talking about the glasses wearing Gardner Green Hubbard, who is an American lawyer financier. He was the founder of National Geographic Society, and he was the first president of the Bell Telephone Company. All right. One of his daughters, Maybelle Gardner Hubbard, married Alexander Graham Bell. Well, Hubbard was born and raised in Boston, and his father was a Massachusetts Supreme Court justice. Oh, were we talking about Buford T. Justice not too long ago? Uh, Charles Estes Hubbard, who later became a first secretary clerk of the Bell system. Hubbard was the grandson of Boston merchant Gardner Green, who was a descendant of Lyon Gardner, an early English settler and soldier whose legacy includes Gardner's Island, which, by the way, still remains in the Gardner family. Uh, so he was in the Boston law firm of Benjamin Robbins Curtis. He assisted in funding this project. So he has some connection to the Bell telephone. The Hubbard Glacier in Greenland was named for him by Robert Peary, and Robert Edward Peary Sr. Was an American explorer and officer in the United States Navy who made several expeditions to the Arctic in the late 19th and 20th centuries. He's best known for leading an expedition that claimed to first reach the geographic North Pole. So I forgot to mention when I was talking about Alexander Graham Bell. He one time had an experiment or had a talking dog. He had figured out a way in order to manipulate his dog's mouth and lips and larynx in order for it to say a few words. And he often impressed people by his ability to do that act. So the payphone. There's a payphone pictured in the image, and it's in basically a Chinese pagoda type of booth. Oh, John Wilkes Booth? Really? John Wilkes Booth, the phone booth. So we're now being introduced to the phone booth. Well, maybe it's not a booth. I don't know. I haven't decided whether this is a phone booth or whether it's just one of those kiosks. But the payphone actually dates back a long, long, long time. And in the United States, they were preceded by pay stations, and this is where you would go in and people would be there and you could just give them money. But the post-pay coin mechanism was invented by William Gray, and he was issued a patent for this device. And he founded the Gray Telephone Pay Station Company. So he was born in Connecticut. His family relocated to Boston. He worked for Pratt & Whitney, where he rose to the head of the polishing department, a position he occupied for 15 years. His father found a job for him at the local drugstore, but the druggist found he preferred tinkering to working. Oh, this maybe William Gray is the actual tinker. Oh, and we're looking for a gray ghost in the shadow of the gray ghost. Well, maybe the gray ghost is simply Mr. William Gray, who in the back of the book on page 178 is referred to because we see a shiny, a shiny payphone there. Okay, so Gray, he made a new belt shifter and patented that invention. Uh, uh, in baseball, a baseball player, he came up with a couple of inventions. First, he came the sand handle baseball bat, the sand handle baseball bat, which was sold by the Spalding Sporting Goods Company, and I'll bet they're out of Chicago. Well, his baseball bat didn't catch on. His next invention proved to be more successful. The chest protectors had been invented by the early 1880s. Deacon White may have created the first. According to legend, his wife, Charlie Bennett, a Major League Baseball catcher, oh, not, oh, the wife of Charlie Bennett, a Major League Baseball catcher, he devised a chest protector, which he began wearing openly as opposed to under the uniform. However, Gray came up with the improved padded protector that shielded the catcher's entire chest and groin area. Well, that might be why the Tinkerbell is on the corner of the table and it's straddling the corner of the table. That might be dicey for the groin area there. Anyway, he sold his patent to Spalding, which advertised as Gray's patent body protector in the baseball. It became standard equipment in the 1890s. So adding a little protection to the nutsack was something that people thought was important in 1883. Okay, well, I'm having a good laugh about the baseball thing, but considering that Yogi Berra, who I thought was referred to, and the Yogi-isms from the Jack-o'-lantern, in other words, talk about gaffes. How many gaffes did catcher Yogi Berra have? And now we've migrated over to baseball and the catcher's vest. Okay, the payphone. So he was inspired to create the payphone when no one would let him use their phone to call a doctor for his wife. Gray eventually found a phone and his wife recovered, but right after the incident, he was determined to create phones available to everyone. Well, Verizon and the rest of the people out there were so nice to us, we would all have phones. So he founded the Gray Telephone Pay Station Company to install payphones across the United States. It was extremely successful, and it even weathered the 29 Great Depression. Gray's patent obviously eventually expired, but the pay telephone has its roots to Tariffville, Connecticut, and he died in Hartford. So I haven't been able to pin down exactly where this company was located, but he sold one of them to another one. So let me see if I can look up Gray Telephone Pay Station Company and see if we can find out if there's any information on the wiki about it. The wiki on it. Some other guy likes the wiki. Well, so the Gray Manufacturing Company for the Gray Telephone in 1928, the complex name is at 16 Arbor Street in Parkville, Hartford. So, this is a lovely building. Oh, this is such a lovely building. The Gray Telephone Pay Station Company building is in the shape of an H. I encourage everybody to Google the property that is at 16 Arbor Street in Park, Hartford, because the building with the two separate wings forms an H when you look at it from the sky. That's pretty interesting. I love it. Whenever I find a big H in the secret, I also enjoy that as well. Okay, so we talked about Bell Telephone, Gardner's Island. We talked about uh, Gray and the payphone. We talked about Bell Labs, but we haven't talked about Kazuo Hashimoto yet. And so the pay telephone company has what I appear to be maybe some writing that's in Chinese or Japanese characters. Let's just call them Japanese characters. So largely the answering and caller ID system patent. One of them is held by a Japanese inventor who registered over 1,000 patents by the name of Kazuo Hashimoto. He patented the caller ID in the United States in 1960 and Japan. He won some awards for this. The telephone answering machine called the Codaphone 700 was produced in 1966, several years before a series of legal battles forced Bell to allow connection of non-Bell equipment. This is the Carter phone decision. Well, the Codaphone was actually a device that was invented in well, anyway, at one time the marketing operation was in Clackamas, but the company is from Portland, or yeah. Oh, let's see. Where is Codaphone? Where was the Codaphone? The Ford. Let's see. The name of the company that made it was Ford Industries, and it was Portland. No, that was the judge in the case. Sorry. Oh man, falling off the edge here with this one. So apologize for that. Okay, well, I just encourage you to look up the Codaphone because it was one of the first telephone answering devices. The telephone answering machine, the model 1100 Codaphone. And it was the Ford manufacturing, but not Henry Ford. Okay, so we already talked about the phrase in here that had to do with Mr. Watson, come here. Uh, so they mentioned the deep fat fryer, and I don't know if this is just to get you to deep fat fried foods in the South or to get you to J.C. Pittman and Sons Company, who manufactured the deep uh, fat fryer in Lynn, Massachusetts. So I don't know if that's supposed to get you back there for the deep fryer. Uh, they're still in business. It's still called Pitco, but there's your deep fat fryer for you at Pitco. Okay, who did this guy try to do a little bit more on the answering machine? Ford Industries is the telephone answering machine Codaphone. I wish I could find some more on this, but I haven't been able to find any more on it. So I apologize for that. Okay. I think we've talked about almost all of the phonies now. And so there's probably a few others. We talked about Mitchell earlier. James P. Mitchell displayed a working prototype of a digital outgoing message with a taped incoming system at the Iowa State University Engineering Open House about the time this book was published. And so basically, maybe there's some stories about Mitchell, if you will, 3 stories of Mitchell. But I'm just basically stretching it out now to make the show longer. So I'm going to kill that and kill that, not talk about it. I don't know why, but when I read this phrase in the book about one of the phrases in the literature led me to when it said every man, woman, and child hooked up, plugged in, and switched on. I couldn't help but think that phrase was a reference to Timothy Leary. And you'll love Timothy Francis Leary because he is a Harvard psychedelic guy. Uh, Experimented with magic mushrooms. He was from Springfield, Massachusetts. He's an only United States military academy at West Point. But he had more infractions than anybody else. And he's accused of going on a binge drinking and failing to admit it. He was asked by the honor committee to resign. He refused and was, quote, silenced, that is, shunned by fellow cadets. He was acquitted by a court martial, but the silencing continued, as well as the onslaught of immense 12 rule infractions. So he eventually kind of reached the insistence of his mother. Okay, well, so silencing, that kind of thing. But his famous quote was that he encouraged people to uh, uh, tune in, drop out. And I just thought that melodic phrase sounded a little familiar. And this guy will take you into Cambridge, Massachusetts. He'll take you to Harvard uh, as a professor and his psychedelic experiments, and then eventually land you, I think, in San Francisco, California. Um, he's an interesting character. Uh, he was arrested at Laguna Beach, California. Uh, he announced that he was going to run for governor of California at one time and challenge Ronald Reagan. Uh, he was in 1969. He joined John Lennon and Yoko Ono at their Montreal bed-in, and Lennon subsequently wrote Leary a campaign song called "Come Together." So you have the song "Come Together," right? And you wondered what the origins of that song was. Well, it's because of the John Lennon and Yoko Ono spent with Mr. Leary in Montreal. And you'll also find out that Yoko Ono and John Lennon visited San Francisco on a few occasions. I mentioned the Weathermen earlier, and I didn't bring them up just out of fun, but for a fee of $25,000 paid by the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, the Weathermen smuggled Leary out of prison in a pickup truck driven by Clayton Van Lygraf. The truck met Leary after he had escaped over the prison wall by climbing along a telephone wire. So the famous escape of O'Leary from prison by climbing a telephone wire could not obviously escape my mention here in this. In 1972, Nixon's attorney general, John Mitchell, persuaded the Swiss government to imprison Leary, which it did for a month, but refused to extradite him to the United States. Again, our Byron Price seems to like these political prisoners, these people who are detained. Uh, Most of them are from Moscow and Ukraine, but here we have another guy, O'Leary, who has some imprisonment involved. Um, Leary's bail was $5 million at one time. The judge at his remand hearing said, if he is allowed to travel freely, he will speak publicly and spread his ideas. Facing 95 years in prison, Leary hired criminal defense attorney Bruce Margolin, and they came up with a defense. In 1973, Leary was sent to Folsom Prison in California and put in solitary confinement. He placed a cell right next to Charles Manson. So Leary basically gets you to another famous Californian who had a cult called the Manson family. And I may have earlier misidentified the cult activity in California as being this Rajesh or Rashish. And it might have actually been Charles Manson. But then again, if you want another cult from California, you could probably look at L. Ron Hubbard. And since we're talking about the Tinkerbells, and Mr. Tinkerbell himself married a girl with the last name of Hubbard, I'm just going to wrap up by saying, old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard, but the cupboard was bare. I'll let you continue on and learn more about Leary. When Leary moved to Laurel Canyon, neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, the Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills. The Laurel Canyon, Holiday Hills. All right. Well, that was introduction of Low Leary to you. So I think I've covered all my bookmarks. I think I'm free to go. I hope everybody had a good day talking about the Tinkerbells. I still haven't figured out why these tits on the Tinkerbell are these shiny, showing tits. But maybe we're just talking about a switch hitter. All right, folks, that's it for this protection. We'll see you later.